Good evening, everybody. Congratulations to Adam and the SEN group on the report. It's a huge effort, so it's good to be here this evening. So our four panellists tonight, each in their own way, are contributing to WA's sunrise energy, renewable energy, aligned with the 4 Ds, which are decentralised, so from big, centralised, inflexible generation systems to small, distributed, flexible and resilient systems, from decarbonised, from dirty to clean, digitised from analogue to digital, and democratised from regulated monopolies to multiple options for our customers. So welcome panellists. We've got 20 minutes to cover our topic. So that's jobs and the new sunrise industry of the future. I'm going to ask you each 2 questions. So that's a minute for introductions and about 2 minutes per question answer. So it's going to be a little rapid fire chat here this evening. I hope you're all prepared and succinct with your responses. Brodie, I'll kick off with you. Brodie is the founder of Spacecubed, so our host this evening. Thank you very much. And also a candidate for the City of Perth's Lord Mayor. So you can like him on Facebook, please, and,
yes, please do.
And connect with him on LinkedIn. So welcome, Brodie. In your quest to become Perth's Lord Mayor, you are seeking to promote a sustainable future for all of WA. Can you tell us a bit about your approach to sustainability?
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. So when setting up Spacecubed, we really looked at, from a sustainability perspective, the environmental, economic and social sustainability. And that was sort of demonstrated through, we set up as a B Corp, so having a better governance and structure in place to actually make sure we were having an impact. And I think it's the same thing from a Lord Mayor perspective and from a City of Perth perspective, where the City of Perth, its current renewable target is 25% of city infrastructure, so Council House, the Town Hall, car parks, 25% renewables by 2030. So well under the 100% sort of target that this report has. But that was written about 8 or 9 years ago now, and there is a big opportunity to reset that, and what my goal is to set it at 100% renewables by 2030. But that won't happen unless there's intervention from a state government perspective, where City of Sydney and City of Adelaide have both done this already. They did it in the last few months, and they did it through partnering with community energy providers, partnering with wind and solar providers, and then upgrading facilities across the city so that it made it a lower power consumption. So I think that's the opportunity for the City of Perth, is to provide those contracts, which mean that these sort of jobs and these opportunities make sense, and from a procurement focus can actually lead the field in this space rather than having that 25% target.
Everyone here would support that mission. Justin Brown is the Managing Director at Element 25. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you. Currently,
Justin, you are developing Australia's largest onshore manganese resource, your Butcherbird project. Your aim is to produce high-purity manganese products at very low costs, so including for lithium-ion batteries, so very important in the context of this conversation. Can you tell us why the project is so important to building our sunrise industry for WA?
Yeah, so it's the project's located about 130 km south of Newman, a huge resource, needed a development pathway that was going to be competitive, and that involves quite a lot of energy. And so our journey's been one of sort of a kernel of an idea to produce these high purity sort of products, and then a pathway to get there, which has been clearly shown to involve quite a lot of renewable energy. So it's a real opportunity for us to sort of spearhead the transition of the mining industry to a renewable-based energy sort of setup.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. And David Manning is the Global Head of Hybrid at Juwi, the large-scale solar and wind EPC, headquartered out of Germany, but you're leading the team here in Australia for the hybrid. Yes. Welcome, David. Your role leading Juwi's hybrid business has primarily focused on mine-site microgrids. A little different is your work with Horizon Power in Esperance. Can you give us a snapshot of why that's so interesting and relevant here?
Yeah, the Esperance project is quite unique. We partnered with Pacific Energy and the Contract Power Group to build a power station down there. Esperance is probably going to be one of the first and most intricate hybrid projects that we've done. in that it encompasses around about 10 megawatts of wind, about 4 megawatts of solar and a 5 megawatt battery, but also tying into a gas reciprocating power station. It's the first time that's been done at that scale, so a really interesting project for us. A lot of challenges. Tying into a residential grid with rooftop is a bit of a challenge because we don't have any predictability of that. So some significant challenges involved, but yeah, very interesting project.
True hybrid scenario. James Campbell-Sloan, welcome. James is the Director in Deloitte's Access Economics practice. Welcome, James. You're focused on labour markets, jobs and skills analysis. You also have extensive experience in international economic policy, including with the UK government. Can you give us a bit of flavour with something around your role, about something you've been working on recently?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emma. So I'm James Campbell-Sloan. I'm Director in Deloitte Access Economics. And one of the it's really interesting to read this report this evening because it kind of chimes with a lot of the work that we've done over the course of the last year in a project we called a New Way, which is looking at what the future of WA looks like. How do you diversify the economy, sort of move it away from the sort of cyclical ups and downs and the resource dependence that we have? And in that we identified sort of 9 clusters that we think serve as the basis for sustainable growth going forward. And it was really interesting listening to the earlier panel because a lot of them are actually the clusters that we picked. So hydrogen's one. There's also a sort of focus on battery minerals as well, but generally where we move towards integrating ourselves into the clean energy supply chains. And we kind of thought that was about, if that was done well and these clusters generated the amount of jobs we expected, then it could be about 75,000 or so by 2030, which chimes nicely with the 5,000 I've seen in here. I can't quite vouch for the calculation, but it seems the same sort of order of magnitude. So, yeah, very encouraging.
Good, excellent. So Brodie, we'll come back to you now. Creating a lively built environment to foster technology and innovation and business was at the heart of what you achieved with Spacecubed. So how do you see the City of Perth and that built environment practically fostering the renewable energy industry?
Yeah, so a few ways. One is from what the city can do to actually both itself be demonstrating to the community through that 100% target. That's definitely something that can be put in place quite quickly and then set that target for the whole community. At the moment, the target for the rest of the community for building owners is around 20% renewables. So I think that is a good way to demonstrate, but then working with building owners, 50% of energy use is from commercial office space. There's already a few different programs that the city's had in place, but for quite a long time, for sort of 12 years now. So refreshing those programs. But the real opportunity I see, and this is what I've managed to been able to do with Spacecubed, is create the environment where the best ideas can get up. So using the city's procurement and then encouraging other businesses across Perth to use their procurement of whether it's energy, whether it's technology to make their buildings more efficient. Everyone in this room has the ideas and the technology, and that's what we've seen, but it's about opening up the city's data, opening up procurement so that it can actually access that and also provide opportunities for other businesses that are large energy consumers or to access that technology as well. So I think that's my approach. Generally, the best ideas are already here. Yep. It's just a matter of setting up the enabling factors to make that happen. And the City of Perth can do that through its policies and infrastructure.
Yeah, I think, we have the technology. It's the enablers that go with it, which is what we need, the regulatory support and the local governments and the like to help us make these things turn into realities. Justin, this is very much at the heart of tonight's discussion. What unique opportunities can you see for our state to create renewable energy jobs?
So one of the things that Australia, or West Australia, doesn't do very well is to actually process our mineral resources to downstream products. So we tend to dig things up, ship them off to China or somewhere else, and they use their energy sources, which are generally coal-based, to turn the iron ore, for example, or in our case the manganese, into steel products or other things. So I think one of the things that renewable energy brings to the table for Western Australia, and all of Australia in fact, is that we can now access very competitive energy, and with that very competitive energy we can now actually tackle those downstream processing opportunities which we haven't been able to do in the past. So I think that I'd like to see mining, and it's sort of starting but it's going to take some time, just change the paradigm and actually look at ways we can actually add more value onshore here and ship less of the value off to other countries. And I think we can do that now, and I think the work that we're doing with our manganese projects makes it pretty clear that renewable has a role to play in that. We're actually very fortunate to have a gas pipeline that goes through our project. So for a lot of new mines in WA, that would be just an absolute blessing, which it is. But in fact, when you do the maths on it, you find that renewables actually is much more competitively priced than even gas, which goes straight to the project. Where a lot of companies have to build a 50-kilometre spur or something to get to their project. We don't even have to do that, and renewables are still much cheaper. So I think it's got to be part of the paradigm going forward to process our mineral resources and generate more value here.
I think that leads nicely on to my next question for David around how you would rate Australian mine sites of renewable energy transition against leading mining countries around the world.
Yeah, without a doubt, I think we're leading the world. If you look at the De Grasser project now, in its 5th or 6th year of operation, one of the world's first hybrid projects, with solar battery diesel, outperforming, generating higher renewable energy than was ever forecast. Recently commissioned was the Agnew project for Goldfields, a wind, solar battery and gas power station, which is the technology that went into that is astounding. There's a lot of work was done behind the scenes to get that project up and running. What the guys at Butcherbird are doing with utilising renewables in a completely different way isn't really been done anywhere else in the world. So I think Australia and specifically Western Australia is leading the world. I think we've got some of the best technology for off-grid mining here in WA. We are starting to see that transition throughout Africa now, and South Africa with the problems they're having is challenging, and they're looking at other options, and gas is becoming a significant component backed up by renewables in South Africa, but still in the mining industry, still a long way behind.
And are you seeing a particular increase in renewable energy opportunities at the moment, or is it been consistent over the last 2 or 3 years? Has there been a change? Yeah,
there has. I think the last 2 years was a big shift for us. I always say 2 or 3 years ago we talked about doing it. A couple of years ago we did a few, and now it's when are we going to do the next one? Yeah. And in particular the Tier 1 mining companies, so Rio Tinto with the Wanu project, the Koodaideri project, heavily invested in renewables in Queensland at the Weipa project, and then BHP looking at significant renewable energy projects. FMG have just made several recent announcements and are building large-scale solar projects. So I think this last couple of years it's been the Tier 1 mining guys that are leading it, and in a lot of cases it's not about cost. I mean, ultimately it needs to be effective, but it is about reducing carbon. So it's good to see. It's refreshing.
I think, turning to the conversation earlier this evening, the drive for global companies on carbon targets is influencing what we need to deliver here, because they're international companies, and it doesn't matter whether or not it's Australia or Germany where their operations are. So I think we will be pushed if we're not pulled. James, back to you. We're undergoing the biggest economic disruption in centuries. And how might a transition in renewable energy help the WA economy to recover and grow?
Thanks, Emma. So that's right. It's the biggest economic disruption, I think, in peacetime, and certainly across the globe. And I mean, this is going to be prolonged as well. So we're not expecting. We're doing our forecasting round right now. We've had to make bigger changes perhaps than we have done in previous rounds. But we're expecting, growth to return in around about the beginning of 2021, and that's not simply. We've actually fared fairly well over here, partly because we've managed the public health crisis very well. But the kind of constant weighing down of things being managed less well elsewhere in the world is kind of really weighing on Australian growth. But that's a return to growth, right? So, but what we'll see is that the shape of the economy that comes out of the recession is going to look pretty different to the one that went in. There's all sorts of things, particularly around how long you maintain social distancing. Brodie can speak better to me, but I reckon the setup of the office was well overdue a social experiment to see how it works at home. But this is, and when I speak to my friends back in the UK, sort of former colleagues about the UK and Australia FTA, the two things that they say that they recognise about us over here are we are world leaders in clean energy and digitalisation, right? Those are the two things that we're recognised for, like I was saying on the first panel. that, you know, that could potentially, where people look to us for leadership. So I think when we, not only is the shape of the economy going to change, but it's also, this provides us an opportunity to sit back and actually just think, oh, okay, well, what sort of economy do we want to have when we come out of this recession, or, you know, when we should be looking forward to the recovery. I worked on a lot of previously in previous roles, countries that were going economic crises, and you've never seen people so willing to entertain ideas that they were previously off the table when there's a crisis take place, and this is literally a crisis. So the question is, if that's sort of a no-brainer, then how do we get there? And for me, I think our general view is that, look, this is a time where private demand is really weak, investment demand is really weak, so there's a room for the government to step in, at least provide some certainty, and not necessarily to worry about accruing deficits or levels of debt so much at the moment. Debt is cheap at the moment, and it's really the long-term costs of high unemployment are far more costly than any sort of levels of debt that you might accrue. So there's that sort of background for government to step in and maybe just really looking to invest in some new technologies, particularly around in this space, to build on the comparative advantage that I think we've all picked up on the panel so far, and you know, this work has, and the preceding panel as well. But really kind of using that to what it's going to take, and I think we were talking about this earlier on, is a sort of clear, where we do fall down is the clear strategy, and the sort of that gives that level of commitment and certainty for private investment to flow, and you know, really provide the foundations for that renewed structure of an economy post-recession, I think.
So this sort of leads on from there, Brodie. This is a bit of a wild card. The jobs report states that the transition could be slower as a result of ineffective policies or a delayed response. What sort of role do you see with the City of Perth, for instance, influencing state and federal policy to accelerate that transition?
Yeah, so I think we have seen, the last sort of 10 years it has been much slower because there hasn't been the policy positions in place. From a City of Perth perspective, you can, there's 2 meetings a year, so Perth has a Capital City Act, which hasn't really been used before, so there's 2 meetings a year between the Mayor and the Premier to discuss issues that will affect the whole state because it is the city's capital. Those are opportunities to put forward this sort of case, and we still have $2.2 billion of state government stimulus that hasn't been, I imagine it's been allocated, but hasn't been announced yet. And that's an opportunity to do these sort of transformative projects that otherwise we wouldn't see. From a local government perspective, it's more around the demand side, so saying that we can be the customer for this, and then encouraging other businesses to do that, setting targets around that. So that's where I see local government playing a role. But also on the jobs piece, I think that's another area that we have a huge opportunity over the next sort of 2 to 3 years with Perth, as it's safe. It's got a really safe brand now globally from a health perspective. What can we do to attract all of the type of workers that Anya was talking about, or get ready to train them up locally? There is going to be a lot of people that need to be reskilled over the next 2 to 3 years because of the transition in the economy. But also, Perth is a great place to live, relocating Asia Pac head offices here. These are the sort of things that governments can do to actually encourage and incentivise people to move here with their families. We do need more people living in Perth, and that's the opportunity that I see. So right now, I think getting some of those policy positions in place, we'll see what the state government does in the next few weeks from a budget perspective, but hopefully there is planning for this in there, and from a local government it's about setting the targets, but then also working with industry to make sure they happen, and the community.
Because it's building whole new industries, and we're not just sort of upstream or downstream and choosing where we want to sit along the supply chain. We're having to create supply chains from the ground up, because these are whole new industries with new talent that's required that goes along with that, and capabilities. And
it's not something we've really done. So we've talked about diversifying the economy for, I don't know how long, 20 years sort of thing. But we haven't really done that much about actually diversifying the economy. So I think this is the opportunity. If we don't take this opportunity, then I don't think it'll come by again, and we'll be reliant on the boom-bust cycles continuing.
Absolutely. Justin, can you tell us how growth in renewables offer extractive industries new meaningful opportunities in green metals?
Yeah, so I guess I touched on it before that we have a real opportunity here to take our ores and process them to downstream products, in our case high purity manganese, both in the form of metal and sulphate. copper follows a similar path, zinc follows a similar path. These always end up as metals, and then they get used to build cars and ships and galvanise things and do all sorts of stuff. So the thing that many people may not understand is that one of the ways you make metal is to electroplate it out of a solution. And the reality is that's incredibly energy intensive. In the case of manganese, it's just a physical fact that you need about 6 megawatt hours of electricity per tonne of manganese metal. So if you're going to make this stuff, you need a lot of power, and you need it cheaply because in our case, it's about 40% of our operating costs. So, but it doesn't just apply to us. I think we've shown that renewables has a big role to play there. Our base case is now, it started at 100% gas, it's moved to about 50% renewable. It's probably going to end up, based on our most recent modelling, at sort of upwards of 70% renewable power to get the optimal economic outcome. So, but I guess the thing is that what you're doing there also is embedding renewable electrons in your metal. So everyone talks about using renewable energy to make hydrogen, but it's equally valid to actually embed it in your metal products that you make with renewable energy. So that could apply to all the metal industries in Australia. Manganese, copper, as I touched on before, gold is already electroplated. So I think that is how we create green metals. We're seeing investment flows be affected by carbon intensity now. So access to capital is going to require people to be thinking this way. Emma touched on it before when she said that if we don't get pulled, we're going to get pushed. I think that's right. I think the end users are going to demand that we make green metals instead of dirty metals. And so I think, it's a genuine opportunity. I think Australia really needs to embrace it and get on with it and start looking at things quite differently to what they've done in the past.
With a huge breadth of things that we need to get our heads around in terms of all the different opportunities that sit in front of us, and where are we particularly uniquely positioned to excel in those particular areas. David, what is the biggest challenge you see in integrating renewables into the mining industry? So you've told us about the huge opportunity and growth, and that we are leading, but what are the challenges that we still face?
Yeah, I think in the mining industry, the biggest challenge is the reliability that's required. I mean, these guys need to operate at 99% reliability, even more than that. You shut a mill down for 4 or 5 hours and you're in a whole world of trouble. You can do that in a residential environment and get away with it. You've got to replace some chicken and some beef out of a fridge and you're okay, but the production losses out of a mine site are significant, and that needs to be taken into account. Also, building a renewable energy solution in remote Australia is a challenge. Now, we did it at Agnew. Getting cranes that could lift a hub height of 110 metres is very challenging. There's not a great deal of cranes in the country that can do that sort of work. Just the environment itself, operating in those sort of temperatures, is very challenging for us. I think, fortunately, as you said, learnings we can take from other countries. We've learnt a lot from our module suppliers. We've made some mistakes. We've had some issues along the way, but we're learning from it. Similar with wind turbines in Europe, especially in Germany. It's a major part of their energy mix. So we're taking those learnings and bringing them to Australia and adapting and modifying and tweaking the solution to suit this environment. So I think probably the remoteness is our biggest challenge. Working with gas, of course, gas is the cheapest fuel. It's in off-grid mining. Gas is one of the cheapest. So unfortunately, connecting a renewable energy source to a gas power station is difficult. They're not that good at load acceptance and rejection. So we're having to have a think about what engines we're using and what turbines we're using in that environment. I think what's really good, and Cameron Sharp from Caterpillar was talking about it earlier this evening when I was talking to him, they're now starting to think about how to build an engine to suit renewables rather than a couple of years ago, how do we get our renewables to suit the current thermal mix. So it's good to see the OEMs starting to think about, the thermal OEMs start to think about renewable energy as well. Yeah,
awesome. All right, and finishing off this evening, James, topical, how can we make sure that the WA workforce has the right skills to fill all these new jobs?
So this is probably when you think about long-term economic growth or things that drive economic growth in the long term. There are three things. Firstly, population growth, participation, so that's the number of people who are involved in the labour market, and thirdly, productivity. So each of those has a sort of strong human capital or person element to it, and it's quite important to focus on this because I sometimes think that we have a mindset that we can build ourselves out of any problems that face the economy here, where it's usually people that are the key driver. And we do a lot of work in this space, and there are Right now, as we've kind of talked about, that there's unemployment about 8.3%. So there are a lot of people around who basically lost their jobs in hospitalities and tourism and don't have the skills to transition quickly across to the jobs that are available in this sector. And when I talk about this sector, I'm really focusing on the asset side of things rather than the operation, because there are some, and on the heavy asset side, just when you talk to any large resources companies, I'm sure you're facing the same thing, but there are some really acute skill shortages. So you can't find a heavy duty fitter anywhere, or the boiler makers as well. There are very few of those around. So in the short term, what you're doing is you're having to compete against occupations that pay a very high wage for some resource employers. But on the flip side of that, the social image and the sort of attraction, it's not just pay that people are after, and we find that in our work that actually it's a lot of, you find people who work in mining in particular are very happy with the wages, but dissatisfied with the amount of hours they have to work and the flexibility that they're afforded as well. So there are opportunities in the short term there, but in the long term, we really need, I could talk about kind of having a accommodative migratory framework to bring in the skills that we need and having the skills, the sort of courses there to train people up. But if you take a step back, and something we always find in these engagements that we run is that you actually just need to have a very compelling case for someone to take up a career in that sector. So some of the problems that we see in recruitment, this is usually a hangover of the mining investment boom, is that you get a job, you're very well paid for it, but that's effectively your job. There's no really any room for growth or looking for a career. Whereas as soon as you offer that to someone, then your kind of retention rate shoots up. You don't necessarily have, you're more willing to invest in your workforce, and it's generally beneficial to the employer as well. And when we're thinking about a group of people a lot of people who've just lost their jobs, you need to have this compelling case to kind of give you the incentive to make that personal commitment to retrain if that's the case that you're willing, you want to, and so you're going to have opportunities throughout the rest of your life, or at least a period of your life in this sector, maybe some others. But it's really that compelling, offer of a enjoyable and long-term career that I think we probably need to think about. And how do you get there? Well, in that case, we've kind of touched on it in both panels. You need you kind of need the environment for businesses and industries to flourish here, which is partly requires private investment and sort of the more of the downstream areas, rather than just focusing just simply on upstream digging out of the ground and not refining. But to do that, you need the sort of government framework in place as well. But when you put all those together, it's hard to do it, get it all ready at once, but then there's a virtuous cycle upwards, because the labour pool that you have helps that virtuous cycle, so you need to get it all together all at once. It's very hard, but this is a window. If you're ever going to do it, it's probably now.
I think that's a good point. It's Infinite Energy, which is where I've come from, which is wholly owned by Sumitomo Corporation now. But we see so many candidates coming through who are so excited about the idea of working in the renewables industry, but they come with no skills. And so there's not renewable energy specific skills, and there's not necessarily that framework and ability to get them to come in as stronger candidates, and how we can kind of take them through it in their careers. And so we have to do that. We take on the role of developing those careers for those individuals.
Yeah.
From the ground up.
Yeah. And that's a lot to ask of employers, without having that sort of government underpinning. So.
And education,
exactly,
yeah. But it's a great brand, and it's got something, that's an absolute asset to us, to be able to come from an industry with such a good brand. So that wraps us up this evening. I think we're good. 2 questions. Got it? Who would like to ask a question?
How do we get policy certainty? How do we get governments motivated in a way that can actually move with the times, so that we've got some momentum, that we can go to the Asian customers and say, we're not going to send you iron ore anymore, we're going to send you steel bars.
We've actually enjoyed good support from government, so we've had funding from ARENA to support some of the development work we do. We have funding under the CRCP program. So I would say there is support out there. That's federal government money, and the state government obviously got ambitions in the battery metal space with the battery hub. So I wouldn't say it's not happening. We'd all like to see it happen more quickly, I guess.
So I was going to say you could vote for me as Mayor of Perth and that I could change the policies, but that's one way to do it. I think that is, you know, being able to talk with the Premier, having those conversations. It's been interesting for me, and I've watched this in the innovation space over the last 10 years in Perth, where I said, you know, when people were asking me about, well, when is WA going to take innovation seriously? I said, as soon as iron ore hits, and this was about 2010, as soon as iron ore hits $46 a tonne, that's when it'll get taken seriously. And then we went way below that and nothing happened. So I think we are getting dragged into this world rather than us actually setting up the pathway to go there. I think that will change significantly over the next sort of 4 to 6 years, where there is a younger generation coming through who do want to see significant change. And the demographics are shifting in that way as well. So I think that will cause a whole range of changes from a policy perspective. COVID, I think, has sped the whole world up by about 10 years and brought forward a lot of the changes that I would have thought would take, we were talking about office space, definitely. People are now very comfortable with their staff working flexibly. I think that's changed dramatically. So I think we've got a number of things that are happening, and the climate change emergency is rolling on. So I think these things are all coming to a head. And there will be over the next few years, and WA, even with COVID, we've got through it quite well. I think there is the community saying, well, the government was able to change quite quickly to tackle that. Why can't it change to tackle some of these other big issues?
You look at the work that Energy Policy WA is doing around the DER roadmap and the whole system plan and the regulatory reform. The framework is there, and the strategy is there. It's just how big do we want our aspiration to be on this? And I think this is what the report's saying to us, is that right now we've probably got the bar a bit too low, and we could actually achieve so much more, but using those channels that are already being put in place there for us.
Yeah, I think Justin nailed it. ARENA, for us in the off-grid market, off-grid mining arena, it was huge for us. They've given us really good support. I think one of the interesting things with ARENA funding is you have to share the knowledge. You can't just take ARENA funds and build your plant and you're away. You have to share the knowledge, and even to this day with DeGrussa, we're still sharing that knowledge. We have to submit a report to ARENA every year, and those learnings are published so that everyone can benefit from it. I think, as you said before, the framework's there. We just need more funds. The threshold limits are a little bit high at the moment, but I think we're almost there. Just a little bit more cash would be nice.
Any other questions? Yes.
This really just flows on from that conversation about what policy is needed to support the transition. What can our education institutions be doing to, empower employees and, as you say, as an employee yourself, you're doing that groundwork and you're building that career path for them. What can our educational institutions like UWA and others be doing to, empower people in this space?
Yeah.
Just really quickly, I think there's so making sure that there's the right level of courses, because this kind of feeds on just to the prior question about what can we do. I've got just thinking it over. I was passing it around, so I have more thinking time. But I've got a suspicion that it's going to happen to us as well, more than actually us being actively driving that transition. I think it'll happen. You can kind of see new projects coming along. That's what's going to happen. But at the same time, then there's a role for the higher education institutions just to make sure that they're not getting perhaps they're making sure that they're responding to make sure that the level of training and courses and provision that they have is out there, focusing on some of these longer term trends to make sure people are equipped to leave with the skills that we will require, rather than kind of chopping and changing things around, which I don't think they do anyway. But it's not so much a role to really keep pushing that, I think, but just making sure that they're in the background and workforces that are coming to enter the labour market are equipped with the skills to pick up these careers, which are more than likely are going to continue to grow over the next decade or so.
Yeah, I was just going to say so youth unemployment, I think, is so we were talking about 8% unemployment. Youth unemployment's at sort of 30% plus at the moment. And there isn't, we've got training councils and a whole range of things that try and determine, well, what are the industries where there's going to be jobs? Part of the challenge I've seen is there's a 4-year lag in that decision-making process, and then it takes a university 4 years to change their degree. So you've got an 8-year lag basically in what's being taught and how that's relevant. I think what we're starting to see, so COVID will change that dramatically, so all of the universities are going to have to adapt really quickly to delivering products that people are going to want to pay for, because I think that's where we're going to see people really wanting to see what is the job at the end of this for me, what's the industry experience I'll get through it, what are the opportunities that are there, because that world of, oh, I'll be able to get a job and do that job for the next 50 years just doesn't really exist anymore. So I think that's the big shift that's happened. So we'll see that modularisation of university degrees. A lot of them are already heading down this path, but again, I think it'll just fast track it by 10 years.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody, this evening. Thank you.